an international relations expert, but we welcome him also with a new title, the CEO of ELNIT, which is the European Leaders Network, and that is certainly relevant to the discussion we're going to have, Emmanuel, because let's talk about Israel and Europe. Eli Cohen trying to set relations right, but we know certainly that clashes, in fact, or diplomatic differences already emerging between a lot of Europe and Israel.
Yeah, and I think the very fact that Eli Cohen made one of his first phone calls to Lavrov, to the Russian foreign minister, this is an embarrassment for Israel, but it's also an offense to Europe, because don't forget that today Russia is waging war in Europe against a European country, and that's probably not the best way to start Israel's relation with Europe, by making a phone call to Lavrov. Even maybe more than the Palestinian issue, because we know, we're very familiar with the basic disagreements between most European governments in Israel on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And this, of course, will have to be discussed. And by the way, there are many differences among European countries. You mentioned the different foreign ministers that Eli Cohen is going to be talking with. There are differences among European countries. But I think that, as I said before, calling the Russian foreign minister before making phone calls to European foreign ministers was definitely a diplomatic faux pas, which is not going to help in Israel's relations with Europe.
Well, since you're touching on that, let's talk about that call he's going to have on Thursday with his Ukrainian counterpart. Ukraine has already expressed its concerns over the very fact that he spoke with Lavrov, and some of what has been said, the fact of talking about perhaps resetting or having a balanced approach to this conflict. What is Eli Cohen? What kind of tone should he be taking with the Ukrainian foreign minister?
I think that, first of all, what's a balanced approach when you have an aggressed country and an aggressor? And what's a balanced approach when Russia today, as we know, is purchasing drones from Iran? I mean, how can Israel on the one hand make the correct case that Iran is a threat, of course, to Israel, but also to Europe? The same Iran today is helping Russia fight its war of aggression against a European country. So what is there to be balanced here? I think that, when it comes to those in Israel, there's some voices in Israel that claim that having a milder approach to Russia, or more understanding approach to Russia, is a matter of political realism. I disagree with it. How is it political realism for Israel to have a more, so to speak, balanced approach to a country that, first of all, when it comes to Russia, provided civilian nuclear technology to Iran, that helped Iran bypass the U.S. sanctions, and today is cooperating very closely with Iran militarily. So I really do not understand which common interest there can be between Russia and Israel, besides, of course, coordinating Israel's freedom of action in Syria. But that, is still happening, and it happened also under the previous Israeli government.
Well, let's look at maybe on a more possible area, because you mentioned the Ukraine and Iran. Certainly Iran supplying of weapons, and we discussed this in our previous segment dealing with the Israel-U.S. relations. Iran supplying of kamikaze drones, military drones to Russia, versus Ukraine, has turned a lot of Europe more against Iran, perhaps some more against the Iran nuclear deal. How much is that going to help Israel in dialogue, especially those countries that have signed on in the past to the Iran nuclear deal, the big three, the UK, Germany, and France?
Well, it can help Israel, again, if Israel doesn't send a message that it wants to get closer again to Russia. We can have the best of two worlds. In other words, finally, I think the Europeans understand better why Iran is a threat also to them, among other things, because Iran is cooperating very closely with Russia in the war against Ukraine. So I do think that Israel can definitely capitalize on the renewed European concern with Iran. But we cannot do that by, calling Lavrov the first day in your job or the second day in your job and say we're going to have a more balanced approach to Russia. It's either or. Either Israel has a very strong stance against Russia and explains to the Europeans that we're totally on board, part of the Western world, supporting NATO and our ally, the United States, against the Russian aggression, or we're trying to say we want a more balanced approach, but we can't have it both ways, and we have to take a very clear stance, especially if we want to work on our relations with Europe.
All right. Well, it's going to be an interesting balancing act that this new government. Eli Cohen, of course, not someone with diplomatic experience. He was intelligence minister. He'll certainly have a lot of work cut out for him when it comes to Europe. Dr. Emmanuel Navon, thank you for joining us.